She called me just extended family, right there in front of the pastor. My daughter-in-law, Sierra. The same woman living in the house I bought. The same woman I babysat for 3 times a week, so I stood up mid-service and walked out. By nightfall, her 30-day notice was already in the mailbox. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. They didn't reserve a seat for me. They saved a lesson instead. The usher smiled warmly at Judith as she stepped through the church's double doors, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. The sanctuary smelled of polished wood and eucalyptus wreaths. Judith, dressed in a cream blouse and slate gray wool skirt, held a small blue box wrapped in tissue paper, her grandson's first Bible embossed with his name. She barely made it 3 steps before Sierra intercepted her. "Judith, you're here early." Sierra's voice was chipper, but her eyes flicked nervously toward the altar. "I thought you might need help setting things up," Judith said, extending the gift. "And I wanted to get a good seat." She smiled, ignoring the flicker of irritation she caught pass across Sierra's face. "Oh, that's so sweet," Sierra said, taking the box and tucking it under her arm like a clutch purse. "Actually, we've already got it all under control." She motioned toward the pews. "You're totally fine to sit in the back with the other extended family." Judith blinked. "Extended?" Sierra gave a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, you know, Josh's co-workers, my second cousins, people we didn't have room to seat up front. We just wanted to make sure the godparents and Pastor Miller's family had front row, obviously." She patted Judith's shoulder as if she were someone's elderly neighbor. The air inside the church suddenly felt colder than the brisk autumn wind she'd just escaped. Judith nodded slowly. Of course. She made her way to the back pew, where a toddler was already crinkling a bag of Cheerios next to a distracted young couple. Judith sat, hands clasped, her heart ticking like a silent clock. From where she sat, she could barely see the altar. But she could see the first 3 pews clearly. Sierra's parents seated center, beaming, holding programs as if they'd paid for the ceremony themselves. Judith had paid for the baby's crib, the car seat, the emergency pediatrician bill. But none of that bought her a seat. As the congregation stood to sing, Judith remained seated. Halfway through the service, she quietly rose, stepped out the side door, and walked to her car, unnoticed by anyone except an elderly greeter who gave her a pitying glance. Her house was just a few blocks away, and she made the drive in silence. The afternoon sun glared against the windshield. At a red light, she tapped her fingers against the steering wheel, her jaw clenched. Back home, she didn't take off her shoes or coat. She walked straight to the hallway closet, pulled out a key ring with a small silver tag, filing cabinet, lower unit, and opened the drawer. She hadn't looked at the documents in years. The paper was slightly curled at the edges, but the ink was sharp and black. She flipped past the cover page, past the notarized stamp, to the highlighted clause her attorney had once mentioned, but she'd never thought she'd need. Landlord reserves the right to terminate tenancy with 30 days written notice at her sole discretion. Judith read it again, then again. Her pulse slowed, her fingers steadied. She sat down at her kitchen table with a notepad and a pen and began to write out a list. Dates, receipts, unacknowledged favors, paint chips on the garage door, the missing rent checks, the time Sierra called her too involved for bringing soup after the baby got RSV. Her cell phone buzzed. A photo notification. Sierra had posted a picture from the service. Everyone was gathered around the altar, smiling, toasting. The caption read, "All the people who made this day perfect." Judith wasn't in the frame. She hadn't been considered part of the picture. She folded the notepad and placed it in the manila envelope with the trust paperwork. Then she reached for her red pen. She circled the line slowly, precisely. Right to terminate lease with 30 days' notice upon sole discretion of owner, then underlined it once and again. They wanted my help, not my presence. The paint fumes were the first betrayal. Judith had walked down the side stairs with a plate of lemon muffins, still warm from the oven, only to find the hallway reeking of freshly rolled eggshell white. Her mahogany trim had been painted over. No warning, no request, just a new, glossy coat and Sierra's flip-flops left in the entryway like she owned the place. She'd paused, muffin plate trembling slightly in her hand, and called out, "Anyone home?" Sierra popped out of the laundry room with a wide smile, holding a paintbrush. "Oh, surprise! I thought—" This color made the space feel more modern. Josh said it was fine. Judith forced a polite nod. "I would have appreciated a heads up." Sierra shrugged. "Oh, I figured you'd want it freshened up anyway. The wood made it feel old." Old. Judith had been feeling that word crawling under her skin for months now. It had started subtly, missed invitations, forgotten phone calls. The shift from, "We'd love for you to come," to, "We'll let you know what time things start." She remembered when the lower unit was still storage and laundry. After Josh and Sierra's wedding, she'd offered it to them as their first home, a gesture of support, of love. Rent-free at first, a temporary bridge until they found their feet. In exchange, they promised respect and proximity. She had drawn up a modest lease, mainly to make things clear. But it was never about money, it was about family. And at first it felt good. Judith loved the little thump of footsteps upstairs when the baby began walking. Loved hearing Josh's keys in the lock. Loved knowing they were close, safe. But Sierra's tone had changed as soon as her own parents began visiting more often. When Sierra's mother came into town, Judith was out of town, or busy, even if she was home. Decorations from Judith's old boxes were quietly replaced by store-bought farmhouse signs and eucalyptus wreaths. One Saturday, Judith had opened the hallway closet to find her vintage serving platters gone, replaced by beige bins labeled Fall, Easter, and 4th of July. Sierra had taken over the shelves like the space was hers by inheritance. She'd tried to keep the peace, smiled when it hurt, stayed quiet when Sierra thanked only those who supported us from the beginning on social media, never once mentioning Judith, not even when Judith co-signed the consolidation loan that let Josh pay off the last of his degree. She told herself that inclusion was more important than credit, that family meant letting things go. But some things began to stick. The missed invitation to the baby's first birthday, the group dinner photos with captions like, "The people who matter most." The awkward silence from Josh when she asked why she hadn't been told. She'd chalked it up to oversight, fatigue, overscheduling. But when she found her old Thanksgiving centerpiece tossed in the garage next to a cracked bin marked "Donate," something inside Judith stopped rationalizing. Then came the final straw. One evening, as she scrolled through her phone in bed, her thumb paused over Sierra's new Facebook post, a photo of the church dedication service, the front pew gleaming under stained glass. Sierra's family, her parents, sisters, aunts, even a godmother, lined up in neat, proud rows. The caption read, "All the people who matter most, front and center, we're so blessed." No sign of Judith, no mention, not even a like from Josh. She hadn't even made it into the background blur. Judith stared at the photo for a long time. Her thumb hovered, then gently tapped Save. She opened her Trust Docs folder, clicked Add Photo, and renamed it Social Evidence, Exclusion Patterns. She closed the laptop and whispered to the empty room, "Let's see how blessed you feel when the locks change." She didn't ask. She just assumed I was done needing space. The first thing Judith saw was the box labeled Marvin Jazz Collection. It sat on top of a folding card table outside the garage, its edges soggy from the night's dew. A warped Ella Fitzgerald sleeve peeked out from the side, water-stained and softening. Marvin's handwriting, elegant, steady, still marked the top of each box. Bebop, Volume 2, Soul Era, 68, Gifts from Judith. Judith felt her lungs tighten. She stepped into the garage. The sharp scent of pine-scented air fresheners hit first, too strong, too artificial. Sierra's plastic bins were everywhere, stacked floor to ceiling like a big box display. Spring, Thanksgiving entryway, summer porch decor, baby's second Halloween. Gone were Judith's wooden crates. Gone was the antique mirror she'd stored until she could refinish the frame. Gone was the wool quilt Marvin's mother had sewn, the one she wrapped herself in during his last winter. She blinked rapidly, then turned and walked back to the porch. Josh was grilling. Flames popped under a layer of burger grease. "Hey, Mom, everything okay?" he asked, flipping a patty. "I was looking for my quilt," she said, keeping her voice steady. Josh didn't look up. "Oh, I think Sierra reorganized the garage, wanted to make space for the baby's stuff." Judith nodded once. "She didn't ask." He hesitated. "I thought she told you." "She didn't." A few minutes later, Sierra came outside, cradling a glass of rosé and smiling as if nothing had happened. "Judith, I hope you don't mind. I did a full clear-out. You had so many boxes down there, and most of it looked like, memory clutter." Judith raised an eyebrow. "Memory clutter?" "Yeah, like stuff you probably don't use anymore. Marie Kondo says—" "I know what she says," Judith cut in, then immediately regretted the tone. Sierra laughed nervously and sipped her wine. "I just figured you might want to start fresh." Start fresh. After 42 years with Marvin, after outliving her siblings, after co-signing the mortgage that let Sierra and Josh live in her house rent-free. Start fresh. Later that evening, Judith walked into her den. The walls were still lined with books. Her late husband's recliner sat untouched, a quiet sentinel beside the fireplace. A single lamp cast a warm glow across the room. She sat at her desk, opened her laptop, and pulled up a file labeled Property and Lease Documents. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, then typed, "Subject, Lease Clause Review, Lower Unit High, Howard. Can we revisit the lease terms for Josh and Sierra? Specifically, sole discretion termination and misuse of shared storage. I believe it's time we had a proper look. Regards, Judith M. Carr." She didn't pause. She didn't second-guess. She hit send. Then she stood and walked out to the garage, collecting her husband's records with gloved hands, gently drying the jackets and restacking them into plastic bins she retrieved from her own attic. The next morning, an email chimed just after sunrise. From Howard Stein, Esquire, subject, Lease Clause Review. "Judith, you're still sole title holder. You can issue 30-day notice immediately, no additional approvals required. Let me know how you'd like to proceed." She read it twice, quietly, then clicked star and flagged it in bold. In the hallway, she passed a framed photo of Marvin and Josh at a baseball game, both in matching caps, both laughing mid-joke. She stopped and studied it for a moment. They wouldn't laugh like that again, but maybe dignity had a second act. Judith picked up the envelope labeled Certified Mail, blank, and slipped it into her desk drawer. Her pen hovered above the seal. She hadn't written a return address yet, but she would. Soon. She asked the pastor to pray for extended family learning their place. I said amen, and began the paperwork. The fellowship hall smelled like cinnamon muffins and lemon pledge. Folding chairs lined the carpeted floor, forming an eager semicircle around the podium where Sierra stood, radiant in a powder blue wrap dress, baby bump barely visible beneath soft silk. Judith sat 3 rows back, nursing a lukewarm cup of decaf and wondering, for the 100th time, why she had come. Maybe it was hope, maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the same quiet urge that had kept her babysitting, baking birthday cakes, and pretending not to notice when Sierra started using phrases like "our family tradition" to describe things Judith had introduced. "Thank you all for being here," Sierra began, smile sweet but voice rehearsed. "Today, I want to talk about healthy boundaries in blended families, and what spiritual leadership looks like when roles get blurred." Judith's jaw tensed. Sierra stepped closer to the podium, voice softening just enough to seem vulnerable, just loud enough to carry. "We've all had that moment, right? When someone just won't let go, won't recognize their season has passed. It's hard, especially when it's someone who means well." A few women shifted in their seats. Someone gave a knowing hum. One even chuckled. Judith didn't move. She stared straight ahead, expression unreadable. "Extended family dynamics," Sierra continued, "can challenge even the strongest marriages. That's why it's important to place people where they truly belong. With grace, of course." A younger woman raised her hand. "How do you define who counts as immediate versus extended?" Sierra smiled wider. "Prayer and proximity. who shows up for you, not just out of tradition, but in spirit. And sometimes, we have to reframe outdated definitions of family. The sting was almost impressive in its precision. Judith placed her cup gently under her chair and folded her hands in her lap. Her palms were warm, too warm. At the end of the talk, the pastor, an affable man with a worn Bible and kind eyes, stepped up to close in prayer. "Lord," he said, "we thank you for wisdom in our relationships. Help us define our homes with peace. Let extended family find their right place, not out of shame, but understanding." Judith's lips parted. Barely. "Amen," Sierra said brightly. "Amen," Judith echoed, but hers sounded like a vow. She left before anyone could corner her with sympathy or surface-level kindness. In the parking lot, the cool air hit her cheeks like ice water. The November sun was sharp but powerless. When she got home, she didn't change clothes or kick off her shoes. She walked straight to her desk, turned on the brass lamp, and unlocked the bottom drawer. The lease file was already open from the night before. Her hand didn't tremble this time. She clicked open a new document on her laptop and typed, "Formal termination of residence agreement, lower unit. Effective, 30 days from date of delivery. Issued by Judith Marion Carr, sole title holder. No anger, no drama, just the steady rhythm of keys and clarity." From the bookshelf, she pulled a manila folder labeled Correspondence and began drafting the letter to her attorney. Her pen moved slowly at first, then picked up speed. In the background, the washer hummed. A sparrow pecked at the windowsill. Outside, in the basement unit, Sierra laughed loudly at something on the television. Judith paused and looked out through the kitchen window toward the faint line that separated her floor from theirs. They'd mistaken silence for surrender. Judith picked up her phone and whispered to herself as she typed a new email subject line, "Initiating termination process." Then she hit send. "She used the church to define my worth. I used the law to define my rights." The certified envelope sat in Judith's lap like a live wire, heatless but pulsing with finality. Her fingers moved slowly over the smooth edge before pressing the flap closed. She'd used her nicest stationery, thick cream with a navy border. It felt more respectful that way. Not kind, but formal. Formal was what people like Sierra understood. Judith placed the envelope inside the mail slot at the corner UPS store. A tiny bell jingled behind her as the door swung open and shut. It felt like punctuation. By 3:42 p.m., the package had been scanned into the system. Recipient, Joshua Carr and Sierra Carr. Subject, formal termination of residence, lower unit effective, 30 days from delivery. Inside the packet were photographs, clearly labeled, showing scuffed hardwoods from baby walker wheels, the kitchen cabinet door that had been broken off and reattached with glue, and a garden bed once meant for Judith's roses now overrun by Sierra's artificial succulents, and a resin gnome flipping off the neighborhood. There was also a table. Not a dinner table, but an Excel chart Judith had printed with color-coded cells. Green, rent unpaid. Blue, maintenance ignored. Red, violations logged. She had dated everything, every favor, every offense, every birthday gift unacknowledged, every voicemail returned a week late, if at all. By 5:17 p.m., her phone buzzed. Josh. She let it ring twice before answering, not because she needed time to think, because she didn't want him to hear her heart beating. "Mom?" His voice was tight. "What's going on?" Judith stood in her kitchen, one hand resting gently on the sink. Outside, the evening light filtered through the pine tree her husband planted when Josh was in middle school. The same tree they strung with white lights every December, back when things felt connected. "I sent a formal notice today," she said evenly. "You and Sierra will need to vacate the lower unit by next month." Josh stammered. "But what? You never even talked to us. You can't just—" "I can," she interrupted softly. "And I did. You'll find documentation included." In the background, she heard Sierra shriek, her voice cracking through the receiver. "She can't do this. She doesn't have the authority. Tell her. Tell her she's losing everything." Judith didn't flinch. Josh lowered his voice, as if shielding her from the noise. "Can we just sit down? Can we talk this through like a family? A long breath. Not of fatigue, but of decision. I tried talking, Joshua, Judith said, voice flat. For 5 years I tried. What you heard was silence. What I gave was grace. You mistook both. She hung up gently before the conversation could curdle into something irretrievable. For a long while, Judith just stood there. The room was so quiet she could hear the hum of the refrigerator and the faint rustle of leaves outside. The smell of lemon oil still lingered from her morning polish of the dining hutch, her mother's, passed down with love and ceremony, not expectation. She went to her office and turned off the desk lamp. Then she walked upstairs and poured herself a small glass of wine. Not celebratory, just steadying. At 9:04 p.m., her phone pinged again. Facebook notification, Sierra Carr posted a new status. The image was a blurry photo of her holding the baby, chin defiantly raised. Caption, "Some people don't deserve the title mother-in-law. Blood is earned, not owed." Comments trickled in beneath it. Judith didn't click to read more. She didn't need to. She turned off the screen, placed the phone face down on the table, and picked up a legal pad. At the top, she wrote in all caps, "Next steps." Then, just beneath it, 1. Notify HOA, remove cars from emergency contact list. 2nd, call property insurance rep, update named occupants. 3rd draft follow-up letter, confirm notice receipt. She paused, pen hovering, and added one last line. 4. Choose peace. Every single time, especially when it's earned. The next morning, Judith woke to a voicemail from the pastor. "Judith, I think we need to talk. Sierra's asked for a meeting, and she mentioned something about being publicly shamed. She wanted public humiliation. I gave her public clarification." Judith didn't rush after service ended. She moved slowly, deliberately, as if she had all the time in the world and no one to impress. She waited until the congregation's chatter mellowed to murmurs and the crowd thinned out in clumps toward coffee tables and parking lots. Then she walked down the center aisle, her heels clicking against the polished tile like punctuation marks on a letter she'd been drafting for years. Pastor Drew was removing his microphone, gently rapping the cord as he always did, careful and reverent with his tools. Judith tapped the edge of the pulpit with 2 fingers. "Pastor? A moment?" He looked up and smiled reflexively, but the smile faded a fraction when he saw the calm finality in her eyes. "Of course, Judith. Everything okay?" She tilted her head. "Depends on how you define okay." They stepped outside, just far enough from the doors so they wouldn't be heard, just close enough that the sanctuary's stained glass still colored the edge of their conversation in flickers of red and gold. Judith didn't rush her words. "You've known me 20 years, Pastor Drew," she began, voice measured but firm. "You baptized Josh. You sat beside me at my husband's funeral." He nodded. "And I've always respected you deeply. Then I'll ask you to listen as a witness," she said, "not as Sierra's referee." He blinked, not sure where the line was headed. "I heard things got tense." Judith folded her hands in front of her, wedding band still resting on a finger she hadn't removed it from in 11 years. "Tense would be me being asked to sit with the extended family during my own grandson's dedication. Tense would be finding my husband's records thrown out so someone could store fake pumpkins. Tense would be overhearing a prayer group session where I was referred to as someone who needed to learn her place." Pastor Drew winced. "I see," he said low. She let that sit in the air for a moment, then added, "I see you've scheduled Sierra to co-lead next month's Women's Fellowship?" "She's on the docket, yes," he said cautiously. "She speaks about boundaries," Judith said. "Good. Let her learn about them firsthand." He exhaled slowly, trying to bridge the 2 worlds with pastoral grace. "Judith, would you be open to a mediated conversation? I'm sure there's been misunderstanding. You've always been the peacemaker in this community." She looked at him fully then. Not unkindly, not bitterly. "Pastor, this is not a church matter," she said. "This is property law and personal history. The only thing that belongs in your sanctuary is the truth, and maybe some silence." He was quiet for a long beat. "If things change, my door's open," he finally offered. "I know," she said, and turned to walk away. Outside, the breeze stirred the edges of her coat, carrying with it the scent of baked bread and distant honeysuckle from the church garden. She heard the soft thump of hymnals being stacked and the faint sound of a child laughing near the front lawn. It didn't sting. Not anymore. That night, she didn't log into social media. She didn't check for updates. She made herself tea, placed a lavender sachet under her pillow, and slept through the night without interruption for the first time in weeks. The following Sunday, Judith arrived 10 minutes early and took a seat in her usual pew, third from the front on the right side, where the sunlight filtered through the glass and caught the glint of her earrings just so. As the organ began to play, people slid into rows around her. A few nodded, one squeezed her hand, but all eyes flicked subtly toward the front. Sierra's pew was empty, not one coat, not one baby bag, not one of her curated smiles. Whispers moved through the room like silk slipping off a hanger. And Judith? Judith sat up straighter and sang every verse of the opening hymn in perfect pitch. After service, the assistant pastor approached Judith nervously and said, "You may want to check the bulletin board. Sierra left a note there, for you." They wanted me extended, but silent. I extended the truth instead. The envelope wasn't thick. It was standard legal white, no fanfare, just business. But Judith placed it on her kitchen table like a quiet declaration of war. The letter was addressed to the Homeowners Association Board of the Pecan Ridge Duplex community. She'd drafted it carefully the night before, tucked between peppermint tea and an online article about reclaiming boundaries in late-life transitions. To whom it may concern, this letter is to formally clarify the title status of Unit B at 1178 Lambert Drive. I, Judith Mayfield, am the sole legal owner of both Units A and B. There are no cosigners, no joint tenants, and no vested legal interests from current occupants Josh and Sierra Mayfield. Please update all association documents accordingly. Also, kindly remove Josh and Sierra Mayfield from the emergency contact list as they are not property owners. Respectfully, Judith Mayfield. She signed it, sealed it, and placed it in her outbox. There was no anger in her movements, just precision. She knew now that power didn't always need to announce itself. Sometimes it simply needed to correct the record. The next morning, she wore gray linen slacks and a seafoam blouse and walked the envelope to the post office herself. The late spring breeze carried the scent of jasmine from her neighbor's porch, and she took a longer route through the side street, where azaleas bloomed in shades of fire and plum. She didn't rush. She wasn't hiding. At the post office, she paid extra for delivery confirmation. Back home, she logged into the HOA portal and submitted the digital duplicate of her letter to the board. She attached a scanned copy of her deed, just for good measure. Then she waited. 3 days passed. Sierra didn't say a word. 4 more. On the 5th day, Judith saw her, head down, hurried, walking to her car with a toddler on her hip. No wave, no eye contact. But something was off. Judith watched as Sierra paused at the mailbox, ripped open a thick envelope with HOA letterhead, and stood frozen. The wind picked up a corner of the paper in her hand, but she didn't move to catch it. She just stared. Judith stepped out to retrieve her own mail, a deliberate choreography. Sierra looked up, caught her gaze, and for the first time in months, didn't smirk, didn't speak. She simply turned and walked inside. Later that evening, Josh came upstairs. No knocking, just a soft rap and a hesitant voice through the door. "Mom? Can we talk?" Judith didn't open the door right away. She sipped from a chipped mug, its handle warm with ginger tea, and let the silence do the speaking for her. Finally, she opened it a crack. "About the notice," Josh started, his eyes tired. "Sierra's upset." Judith held his gaze. "So am I." He blinked. "You didn't have to go to the board." "I did," she said calmly, "because the truth didn't seem to be traveling fast enough on its own." He rubbed his neck. "Can't we figure this out another way?" "We could have," she said, "but no one asked me to be part of the family conversations, just the cleanup crew." He looked away. "I've asked the HOA to reflect reality," she continued. No more confusion, no more assumptions. You're tenants, not heirs. He flinched slightly but said nothing. Back downstairs, Sierra was pacing behind the blinds. She told the HOA we're nothing, Sierra hissed as Josh returned. No, he said quietly. She told them the truth. That night, Judith made lemon chicken and roasted asparagus, sat down with a journal and wrote 3 words at the top of the page. Next, the will. At sunrise, a new envelope slid under Judith's door. No name, no return address. Inside was a note. You've made your point, but don't expect forgiveness when it's your turn to ask. They thought they could cry their way back in. I brought the spreadsheet. Josh arrived on time, alone, for once. Judith noted it from the living room window, where the light caught the silver threading in her cardigan. No Sierra, no stroller, just Josh, standing on her porch, shoulders slightly hunched like he wasn't sure if this door would open for him anymore. She let him stand there for a moment. Then she opened the door. Thanks for agreeing to talk, he said, holding his keys like a shield. Judith didn't answer. She stepped aside and gestured him in. The dining room table was already set, not for a meal, but for a reckoning. At the head, a leather-bound binder. To the right, a worn manila folder with the tab labeled Support Disbursed, 2016 to 2023. To the left, a thin silver laptop open to a spreadsheet titled simply, Family Investment. Josh sat across from her, noticeably uneasy. She didn't waste time. You wanted this meeting, so let's make it useful. He opened his mouth, then shut it. Nodded. We didn't expect things to get so formal. They weren't formal when you moved in, she said, voice calm but clear. But I think we're well past casual, don't you? She tapped the binder. This is every check I've written on your behalf, every bank statement, tuition bill, contractor invoice, and furniture receipt, every diaper run, babysitting schedule, and Sunday night meal. I logged it all. Josh glanced at the first page. A color-coded timeline stared back. I didn't ask you to keep score, he said softly. No, she said, but you made it clear you weren't keeping track either. There was no anger in her tone, only weariness. Josh rubbed his temple. Look, I know Sierra can be sharp. Judith's eyes narrowed. It's not about sharp. It's about slicing me out. Josh looked down. We didn't mean to do that. You did it anyway, she replied, and you didn't stop her. Not when she changed the locks on my garage storage, not when she told the pastor I was just extended family. Not even when she tossed out your father's vinyls like they were clutter. Josh's eyes welled, but Judith didn't soften. She simply reached for the envelope beside her and placed it on the table. He picked it up. It was thick. The will, she said. He opened it slowly, unsure of what he would find. The first page confirmed his fears. He and Sierra were no longer beneficiaries. In their place were a scholarship fund in her late husband's name, a women's transitional housing program in Tallahassee, and one goddaughter, Amy Barnes, a nurse Judith had known for over 30 years. Josh sat back in silence. His throat moved, but no sound came. I didn't do this to punish you, Judith said finally. I did it to protect what's left of my peace. I won't let it be traded again for fake civility and seasonal gratitude. He looked at her then, not as a mother, not as a wallet, but as someone he no longer fully understood. Are we cut off? Judith took a breath. Not forever, but for now? Yes. If things change, the papers can too, but that requires action, not tears. Josh blinked fast. Sierra will be livid. Judith stood. Then maybe she'll understand what it's like to be excluded. She walked him to the door, but paused before opening it. One more thing, she said, retrieving a small framed photo from the entryway table. It was the last family photo they had taken, Judith in the back row, slightly out of focus. She handed it to him. When you figure out who's centered in your life, maybe you'll frame it differently next time. Back inside, Judith reopened her laptop and highlighted a new line. Contingency addendum. Pending moral reinstatement. They weaponized proximity. I weaponized the paperwork. The second time Judith sat across from Frances Klein, her estate attorney, she didn't need notes. She had lived every bullet point. The conference room smelled faintly of lemon polish and legal ink, clean, clinical, precise. Frances adjusted her glasses and leaned forward. "You're certain?" Judith didn't blink. "Completely." Frances slid the updated draft of the trust across the table. "Then all we need now is a signature." Judith held the pen without hesitation, but before pressing it to the page, she said, "I want the reason recorded." Frances nodded. "That can be done in the supplementary declaration. Want me to type it?" "I brought it," Judith replied, reaching into her handbag and unfolding a single handwritten sheet. In neat, looping cursive were the words, "I supported Joshua and Sierra Marshall with full heart and full wallet. What I received in return was dismissal, erasure, and disrespect masked as boundaries. I choose now to prioritize presence over obligation and love that returns, not drains." Frances read it once, lips pursed with quiet admiration, then placed it into the trust file. Legally valid, emotionally airtight. Judith finally signed. With that, Josh and Sierra were no longer the sole heirs to the house they'd repainted without permission, the unit they'd treated like a stepping stone, the home they never acknowledged her in publicly. In their place stood Amy Barnes, Judith's goddaughter, an ER nurse who never showed up empty-handed and always hugged like she meant it. Amy visited monthly, called weekly, never forgot a birthday, and most importantly, never treated Judith like she had an expiration date once her usefulness passed. "She's going to call," Judith said, capping the pen. Frances smirked. "Do not answer." Outside, the sunlight was sharp. Judith didn't rush. She walked to her car like someone who had just set down a weight she didn't realize she'd been carrying for 10 years. Sierra found out before dinner. Josh hadn't told her, he hadn't even seen the new documents yet. But someone from Frances's office, a scheduling assistant, called the house to confirm a notarization was filed, and Sierra's name wasn't on the inquiry list. Sierra's first voicemail arrived at 7:19 p.m., clipped and ice cold. "Hi Judith, just wondering why Amy's name came up with the trust office today? I'm sure there's some confusion." Judith didn't respond. The second voicemail, 9:42 p.m. "I really think we should talk. You're making decisions that affect the entire family." Judith muted her phone. The third, at 11:03 p.m., came after a glass or two of wine, no doubt. "This isn't fair. You're turning your back on your own blood. That girl's not even related to us." Judith listened to the whole message before deleting it. Then she opened a drawer in her roll-top desk and pulled out a small album. Inside were photos of Amy visiting the hospital when Judith had her hip replaced, of her bringing flowers after her husband's passing, of her holding the baby the first time Sierra ever let anyone else besides her family hold him. Not related by blood, but never missed an opportunity to show up. Judith placed the voicemail transcript inside the trust folder, behind the declaration. "Just in case," she murmured to herself. She walked to the kitchen and poured a cup of chamomile tea. The scent of honey drifted through the room. She didn't feel angry. She felt restored, like a line had finally been drawn around her life, and she was inside it for once, not standing just outside the edges, waiting to be acknowledged. As she turned off the lights and passed the entryway, a knock echoed through the house, sharp, hurried, desperate. Judith paused, teacup in hand, heart steady. She didn't need to guess who it was. She just needed to decide whether to answer. "They called me bitter. I called it documented." Judith didn't flinch when she saw Diane from Bible study at her front door, holding a basket of blueberry muffins and wearing a conflicted smile. It was the same Diane who'd sat beside Sierra the Sunday after the service incident, nodding along as Sierra gave a polished prayer about keeping family roles in their place. Now Diane shifted on her feet like someone reconsidering every amen she'd whispered in agreement. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said softly. "These are just a little peace offering, or maybe curiosity offering, if I'm honest." Judith opened the door wider. "Come in, Diane. I've got coffee that's not from a Keurig and a porch that doesn't eavesdrop." They sat in Judith's sunroom, the windows casting soft light on the floral upholstered chairs that had outlasted 2 administrations and 1 marriage. Diane set the basket down and folded her hands like a child bracing for correction. "I didn't know," she began. "I didn't know it was your house. I assumed you lived upstairs because Josh and Sierra were helping you." Judith smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "They've never paid a dime in rent." The silence stretched. I feel foolish," Diane admitted. "At prayer group, Sierra talks like you're just visiting. She said it was generous to let you stay in their property so close to the baby." Judith reached into the cabinet beside her armchair and pulled out a thin, worn manila folder. She laid it gently on the coffee table, like it was scripture. Inside, the original deed. Her name, her late husband's name, dated 15 years before Sierra's Pinterest wedding. She didn't need to explain it. She just let the ink speak. Diane scanned it silently. Her cheeks darkened. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," Judith replied. "Just stop nodding next time someone rewrites my story in public." Diane didn't argue. She looked away, embarrassed, but she didn't leave either. Before she left, she said, "You know, you should come back to Circle. I think people are starting to ask the right questions now." Judith tilted her head. "Or maybe they're finally asking any." Later that week, Judith noticed something odd. At Thursday's community dinner, she wasn't seated at the folding card table in the back. Instead, her name was quietly penciled onto the main church reception list. Her dish was listed as Judith's cornbread casserole, not Josh's mom's side. On Sunday morning, the whispering was different. Not pity, not judgment, but murmurs of correction. "Did you know she funded their college? She paid off their roof? I heard Sierra's name isn't even on the title." One of the elders, a gray-bearded man named Wendell, who usually nodded off halfway through the sermon, stopped her near the offering box. "Judith, I owe you an apology," he said, voice low and sincere. "I let perception trump fact. That won't happen again." She nodded, appreciative but unsurprised. Documentation did what pleading never could. Truth made humble what pride couldn't imagine. Still, Judith didn't gloat. Instead, she walked to the rear pew and sat in her usual spot, not because she'd been banished, but because she'd reclaimed the dignity of choosing it. She opened her hymnal, the corners dog-eared, the spine cracked. Her voice joined the others in "Great is thy faithfulness," smooth and steady. And halfway through the verse, she noticed two women from Sierra's circle glancing at her, not with suspicion, but with the quiet awe that followed clarity. That night, Judith received a text from an unfamiliar number. It read, "I heard what really happened. You don't know me, but I think we're overdue for coffee. Ruth, church council. I carried their Christmas down the steps. I carried my dignity up them." Judith stood at the top of the basement stairs, sleeves rolled, breath fogging in the cold draft sneaking through the old storm door. The smell of cedar storage boxes and aging cardboard tickled her nose, a scent that once meant holidays, now soured by the weight of clarity. She cradled the first box in her arms, red plastic with cracked corners and a piece of masking tape labeled "Josh's Ornaments." The handwriting wasn't hers. She'd never been invited to help decorate that tree. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from age but restraint. Not a single bulb would break, not a single garland would be tossed. She wasn't going to feed their narrative that she'd acted out of spite. No, she would act with precision. Down the stairs, out to the driveway, and onto the dry concrete went the first load. The winter sun cast long shadows, but Judith moved methodically like a librarian shelving overdue books. She made 3 more trips, each with care. Sierra's spring decor, baby's first Christmas, extra kitchenware, all labeled in clear Sharpie. Not one word in anger, just titles for the lives they assumed they owned, inside her home. The crunch of gravel under tires startled her. She turned to see Carol, the widow from next door, parking halfway up the shared drive. Carol stepped out slowly, clutching a grocery tote, but her eyes were fixed on the growing pile. "They're not even out yet?" Carol asked, gently scanning the boxes. "No," Judith said, straightening up. "Lise says they have until the 1st. I'm just getting a head start on the items stored in my space." Carol walked closer, lowering her voice. I heard what they said at last week's church dinner, that you were unstable, that they were giving you grace to age and place. You know, like you were the guest in your own home. Judith's jaw tightened. They didn't give me grace. They gave me instructions. Carol gave a low whistle. Well, you're giving them something else entirely. That's the difference. Judith offered a quiet smile. I don't need to win. I just need to finish clean. Later that afternoon, Judith opened the last box in the basement. It was unlabeled, dusty. She peeled back the top, half expecting more of Sierra's faux rustic decor, but inside was something older, familiar. Her wedding photo album, a tin of 8mm tapes, the ornament her son made in second grade with a popsicle stick frame and glitter glue still hanging from a bent hook. It hit her low and hard. This space had held her history while Sierra's Pinterest lifestyle swallowed it whole. She sat cross-legged on the cold cement, cradling the ornament in her palm. The glitter had dulled, but the feeling hadn't. She could still hear Josh's voice at 8 years old, bragging about how it sparkled better than any store-bought one. That child she'd raised alone. Through job changes, skinned knees, and mortgage payments, he didn't just forget her, he repackaged her as an obligation. Judith placed the ornament back into its original box and rose. Upstairs, she brewed a fresh pot of decaf, her joints aching but mind alert. At dusk, she went out again and draped a tarp over the stacked boxes, secured it with bungee cords so no wind would scatter the pieces of their entitlement. She left a sticky note on top, in her own careful cursive. Ready for pickup. Please remove by Friday. J. As she turned to head back up the porch stairs, the porch light flicked on automatically, catching her in a soft amber glow. Judith! A voice called. She looked up. It was Ron from 2 doors down, retired contractor, notorious for minding everyone's business. He scratched the back of his neck. I know it's not my place, but I heard what they said about you. Some folks did. You deserve better than that. Judith looked at him, calm and resolute. I know I do. And that's why they're not staying. Ron hesitated, then added, You know, if you ever want to build that upstairs sunroom you always mentioned, I've got winter availability. Might be time to make space for you. She wrote a paragraph. I rewrote the future. The vibration buzzed against the wood of Judith's kitchen table, a soft alert that normally meant a grocery delivery or weather warning, but today her stomach tightened before she even picked up the phone. The sender was Sierra. The message was brief. Sorry if things came off wrong, just trying to keep our home peaceful. Let's not make this bigger than it is. Judith stared at the screen, unmoved. No, I was wrong. No ownership, no recognition of how far things had gone, just a sterile PR statement dressed in defensiveness. She read it again. Then, without sigh or sentiment, tapped delete. There would be no reply. Not anymore. Judith stood slowly, her knees stiff from the damp weather. The kettle whistled behind her, but she ignored it. Instead, she walked to her study, a space filled with filing cabinets, leather-bound books, and a single photograph of her and Josh from the day he graduated college. Her hand lingered over the picture, then moved to the second drawer in the file wall. She turned the key and opened the drawer, not for papers, but for what lay behind them. A safe, tucked neatly beneath old tax folders and photo negatives. She entered the 6-digit code with calm precision. The click of the lock echoed louder than expected in the quiet room. Inside was an envelope she hadn't opened since sealing it 6 months after her husband died. Final trust instructions. Cream-colored. Heavy stock. Her handwriting across the front in faded ink. She brought it to her desk and opened it with the care of someone handling a fragile heirloom. Inside were 3 documents. An updated copy of the trust, notarized and fully valid, a letter to her attorney, Francis, with instructions for final disbursement, and a post-it she'd scribbled in the middle of the night after Sierra's 3rd snub at a family dinner. Kindness isn't owed, neither is legacy. Judith placed the envelope flat on the desk, hands folded over it like it was sacred. The house creaked above her, Josh and Sierra moving about, likely unaware of the legal avalanche about to roll down on them. She didn't feel anger anymore. That had burned out weeks ago. What remained was a cool, fierce clarity. She had tried. She had offered time, space, love, shelter, and silence. Sierra had mistaken that for surrender. Josh had watched and called it balance. But now? Judith reached for her planner and flipped to the current week. She circled Thursday. Then, beneath it, wrote in clean block letters, "Submit to Francis. Mail original. Keep peace. Keep power." A sudden sound broke her focus, the squeal of a door upstairs, followed by muffled voices. Josh's voice filtered down. "Just let it go, Sierra. It's her house." Judith didn't smile, but she did feel something settle in her chest, like a spine straightening. In the kitchen, the kettle had gone cold. She reboiled the water and made herself a fresh cup of mint tea. Each steeping minute was a meditation. The house, for once, felt like hers again. She walked to the front window, teacup warm in her hands. A thin curtain of mist blanketed the street. Across the way, Carol waved from her porch. Judith lifted her mug in response. From her pocket, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a forwarded email from Francis, her lawyer. "Prepared to finalize at your signal. Everything remains within your sole discretion." Judith tapped back. "Final envelope will arrive Friday. Proceed." She sealed the trust envelope again, this time with intent, not just precaution, and set it in her outgoing mail tray. As she turned off the lamp, the hallway filled with soft laughter. Sierra's voice. Loud, thoughtless, confident. Judith paused, then whispered to herself, "You laughed first. I'll write last." She looked for her seat at the front row. It wasn't saved. The invitation came in the form of a group email, generic, impersonal, and buried beneath Amazon promotions. Baby Ezra's first birthday celebration, Church Fellowship Hall, following service. No direct greeting, no, "We'd love to see you there." Just a line among dozens. Judith read it twice, then marked it unread. She didn't RSVP. She didn't have to. She'd already bought her outfit. A deep plum blouse with a silver pin, neat black slacks, and the leather shoes her late husband once said made her look like a senator and a queen. Today, she dressed like both. Sunday morning broke cool and still. The sky was washed in muted gray, like even the weather had decided to behave with restraint. Judith parked a block away, not out of shame, but to avoid the awkward scramble for front-row visibility. She walked in just before the sermon ended. People milled, smiled, some offered polite nods. She returned them with quiet dignity, glancing toward the front row where Sierra sat, baby Ezra perched on her hip like a trophy. Sierra was radiant in curated chaos, flouncy blush dress, gold heels, and a blowout that screamed effortless, while taking 2 hours and a Dyson Airwrap to achieve. The row beside her was full, her parents, her sister, her friend group from Moms and Mimosas. Judith didn't recognize half of them, but she noticed what wasn't there, a single seat with her name on it. She chose a seat 3 rows from the back. It squeaked as she sat. No one looked. Judith didn't mind. The pastor closed the service with prayer. "We lift up baby Ezra, born of faith, surrounded by love." His eyes scanned the congregation, landing briefly on Judith. He nodded once. She held it like a badge. The celebration moved to the fellowship hall. Balloons, cake, folding chairs draped in tulle. The air smelled of buttercream and artificial vanilla. Sierra stood near the cake, holding court. "I just wanted to thank everyone here," she said into a microphone. "You all made Ezra's first year so special, especially my parents, who've been here every step of the way." Judith felt no burn, only observation. Her presence had been scrubbed from the record. She sipped water from a waxed paper cup and watched as Sierra turned toward the gift table. Every wrapped box was pastel blue, every tag bore names that weren't hers. Judith waited until most guests were busy with punch and compliments. Then she stood and walked, slowly but with purpose, toward the front. Josh turned just as she neared. "Mom?" he said, startled. You came. She nodded. I always do. He looked awkward, caught between guilt and routine manners. Did you want to say hi to Ezra? I'll let him enjoy his day without obligation, she replied. She reached into her leather tote and pulled out a white envelope. No decoration, just her handwriting. Across the front. Josh took it, uncertain. What is this? Judith looked at him evenly. Read it later, privately. His eyes flicked towards Sierra, who was watching from across the room, eyes narrow. Judith leaned closer, voice low. It's not spite, it's structure. Then she turned and walked away, not rushed, not shaken. Sierra's voice rang out behind her. You could have just mailed it. Judith paused mid-step. Without turning around, she replied, Some things deserve hand delivery. The crowd kept talking, but their tone shifted, a beat slower, a shade quieter. Outside, the wind picked up. Judith drew her coat closed and walked to her car, the envelope no longer in her bag, but now a tether behind her. Inside, it was a letter of final intent. Josh and Sierra were now formally removed from her estate plan. The duplex title had been reassigned to a charitable trust. The new tenant would be a retired foster care volunteer and her therapy dog. Approved, background checked, and deeply grateful. As Judith drove away, her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. One new voicemail. Josh's voice, shaken. Mom, I didn't know it was going to be this final. Please call me. They extended insults. I extended consequences. The door creaked open at 9:03 a.m. sharp. Judith stood at the top of the stairwell, clipboard in hand, watching as two young men from the local outreach ministry hauled a donated love seat down the narrow flight of steps. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence in the air was taut. Less the absence of noise, more the residue of weeks of quiet fury finally given form. Josh was nowhere in sight. Sierra had come downstairs once, half asleep, hair pulled up in a rushed bun, muttering something about this being excessive, before slamming the bathroom door and locking it behind her. That had been 2 hours ago. Now, room by room, her past generosity left in labeled piles: dining set, donation crib, local shelter, bookshelf, pickup pending. Each item had once been handpicked, paid for with her own savings, moved in by her own arms. Sierra had called it a gift, but Judith had called it something else today. Reclaimable. Where do you want the side table? The taller mover asked. Back of the truck, wrapped, she said steady. It's real cherry wood. Outside, the wind blew dry and crisp, whipping a sheet of bubble wrap off the porch and down the driveway. Judith stepped down to retrieve it, passing the charity van marked with green letters, Second Chance Home Start. She liked the name. It felt poetic. She paused by the flower bed, half dead from neglect. The soil had been rich once. She remembered planting daffodils here the spring after Josh was born. Now the bed held cigarette butts, a faded chew toy, and plastic forks that had never made it inside. She picked up a fork and flicked it into the trash bin. Behind her, Sierra finally emerged, arms crossed, phone in hand. You really didn't have to do all this, she said. We were going to take care of it this weekend. Judith raised an eyebrow. You had 5 weekends. Sierra let out a brittle laugh. You're really just going to kick your own family out like this? Judith walked back to the clipboard, checked off a line beside mattress removal, then looked up. You extended the stay, the boundaries, and the disrespect, she said. I'm just confirming the expiration. You're bitter, Sierra snapped. No, Judith said calmly. I'm done. Sierra blinked at the flatness of it, the sheer stillness that offered no apology and left no door cracked open. She retreated back inside without another word. By 3 p.m., the lower unit was empty. Swept, photographed, keys collected. Judith walked through the rooms one last time. The scent of lemon cleanser clung to the air. A patch of peeled paint marked where Ezra's baby monitor had once been screwed in. She didn't patch it. She didn't need to cover anything up anymore. Upstairs, she sat at her dining table with her realtor, a woman named Camille with steely gray hair and a reputation for clean deals. You sure about the listing terms? Camille asked, pen poised over the document. Judith nodded. Add the clause. No family tenants. Not again. Camille chuckled softly. You want it in bold? Caps lock, Judith said. They both smiled. Camille stood. We'll run the listing photos tomorrow. Should have interest by week's end. Duplexes in this school zone don't stay long. Judith walked her to the door, then lingered after it closed. Her living room felt spacious again. Not just in square footage, but in energy. No tension pulsing beneath the floorboards, no whispered complaints rising through the vents. Just peace. She walked to the wall and adjusted the framed photo of her and Josh at his college graduation. He was 23. She was proud. And hopeful. Maybe she still was. Just in a different way now. That evening, as the sun slipped behind the rooftops, Judith watched the online listing go live. The last sentence stopped her. For a beat. Owner occupied. Quiet. No family tenants permitted. And then her phone buzzed. Josh again. No voicemail this time. Just a text. Did you really list it with that clause? She called me extended. I called it closure. The sound of paws pattering across the hardwood floor filled the lower unit. Light jazz drifted from a Bluetooth speaker, and the faint smell of chamomile tea blended with lemon oil from the diffuser in the kitchen. Judith stood at the top of the interior stairs, listening to the soft harmony of peace below her feet, something she hadn't heard in years. Mrs. Linda Carver, a retired high school English teacher with a golden retriever named Scout, had moved in 3 weeks ago. She paid rent early, baked cinnamon muffins without being asked, and thanked Judith for every small kindness. More than once, Judith had caught herself pausing outside the kitchen door just to listen to the gentle hum of someone content to simply exist. No expectations, no entitlement. You know, Linda had said the day she signed the lease, I always dreamed of living somewhere quiet, with no drama. Looks like I found it. Judith had smiled, saying only, You have no idea. Upstairs, Judith sat on her sofa with her goddaughter Rachel, who was crouched behind the TV console running cable lines and syncing smart devices like she was defusing a bomb. Rachel's dark curls bounced as she popped back up, wiping dust from her palms and grabbing her tablet. Okay, Judith, your Wi-Fi is now secure, your thermostat is smart, and your living room speakers are voice-activated. Judith blinked. So I just talk to them? Rachel grinned. Only if you say please. They're very polite. Judith laughed, her voice fuller than it had been in months. What would I do without you? Probably keep using that rotary phone and watching crime shows on VHS, Rachel teased. They shared a look, warm, knowing. Rachel had been her husband's goddaughter before she became Judith's lifeline. While Josh faded into apology texts and Sierra dissolved into social media silences, Rachel had shown up with soup, with patience, with muscle to help clean out the garage. You're more family than anyone who's ever shared a last name with me, Judith had said once. She meant it then. She meant it now. Later that afternoon, Judith dressed for Sunday service. A navy skirt, pressed blouse, and the brooch her husband once gave her on their 20th anniversary. She clipped it to her collar, straightened her spine, and drove to the church with the calm steadiness of someone reclaiming her space, not demanding it. The sanctuary was already half full when she arrived. She walked through the center aisle, eyes scanning the pews with curiosity, not apprehension. People looked up. Some nodded. Some smiled. No one looked away. She sat in the third row, not in back, not off to the side. Third row, center, where her grandson's dedication had once been held, without a seat reserved for her. Pastor Harold began the service. Judith listened with open ears and a lighter heart. Afterward, as the congregation mingled in the foyer, one of the older women from the Bible study group approached. You look radiant today, Judith, she said, gently touching her arm. Peace wears well, Judith replied. Another came forward, then a third. Quiet acknowledgments, not pity, recognition. Sierra wasn't there. Josh hadn't shown in weeks. Judith didn't ask why. She returned home just as the sun filtered through the maple tree out front, casting honeyed light through her lace curtains. Scout barked once downstairs, as if to say welcome back. Judith poured herself a cup of mint tea and sat by the window. Her phone buzzed once on the counter. A new message from Josh. We're moving in with Sierra's parents for now. Maybe one day you'll realize what you lost." Judith didn't reply. She simply tapped the message, held it for a moment, and pressed delete. She leaned back in her chair, tea cradled between her palms. The house was quiet, humming only with peace, and for the first time in years, she felt no need to fill the silence. She called me extended family. I called her removed, with notice.